On a frost-edged morning in November 2011, in the small town of Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, a young woman named Jennifer Hayes disappeared from her modest apartment on Maple Street. She was 23 years old, a nursing student at Lakeshore Technical College, 3 months from graduation. Her car sat in the parking lot, keys still in the ignition. Her coffee mug rested on the kitchen counter, still warm to the touch. Her textbooks lay open on the dining table, highlighter uncapped beside anatomy notes she would never finish. The door stood slightly ajar, winter wind pushing against it in irregular intervals. By nightfall, search teams combed through frozen fields and empty warehouses. By week's end, the entire county knew her name. But Jennifer Hayes had vanished as completely as morning fog burns away under sunlight, leaving behind only questions that would haunt investigators for years. What happened in those early morning hours when the world was still dark and quiet? Sheboygan Falls sits 25 miles north of Milwaukee, a town of 7,000 souls built along the Sheboygan River, where water once powered mills and tanneries. The downtown stretches 3 blocks, brick storefronts from another century housing a hardware store, a diner called Maggie's Kitchen, a pharmacy with creaking wooden floors. In 2011, the economic recession had carved deep wounds into communities like this one. Factory jobs had dried up. Young people left for larger cities. Those who remained knew each other's business, knew which families struggled and which pretended not to. The apartment building where Jennifer lived was a converted Victorian house split into 4 units, paint peeling from window frames, front steps sagging in the middle from 100 years of footfalls. Jennifer Hayes had grown up 40 miles south in West Bend, the youngest of 3 daughters born to Robert and Susan Hayes. Her father worked maintenance at a paper mill. Her mother cleaned houses for families in newer subdivisions. Jennifer had been quiet as a child, the sort who preferred books to crowds, who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, who cried when she found injured birds and tried to nurse them back to health in cardboard boxes lined with dish towels. She had graduated from high school with modest grades but fierce determination, working 2 jobs to save money for college. At Maggie's Kitchen, she waited tables Thursday through Sunday morning shift. At the Walgreens on Highway 23, she stocked shelves Tuesday and Wednesday evenings. Her coworkers described her as reliable, punctual, someone who picked up extra shifts without complaint. She lived alone, which worried her mother, but Jennifer insisted she needed the space to study, needed the quiet that her family's crowded house could never provide. The apartment itself was spare. A futon in the living room doubled as her bed. A card table served for meals and homework. Posters from veterinary medicine conferences covered walls she was not allowed to paint. The refrigerator held basics: milk, eggs, sandwich supplies, takeout containers from Gawker Kitchen that her manager let her take home. On the narrow counter sat a coffee maker she had bought at a thrift store, the glass carafe slightly cracked but still functional. She kept her nursing textbooks stacked beside the futon in careful towers organized by subject: anatomy, pharmacology, patient care fundamentals. She highlighted passages in yellow and wrote notes in margins, with handwriting so small and precise it looked like printed text. November 17th, 2011, arrived cold and gray, the kind of morning where dawn never quite breaks through cloud cover. Temperature hovered just above freezing. Frost patterns traced delicate geometries across windows. Jennifer had been scheduled to work the breakfast shift at Maggie's Kitchen, which meant arriving by 5:30 in the morning to help prep and open at 6. She typically woke at 4:15, showered, dressed in her black work pants and white button-down shirt, tied her dark blonde hair back in a ponytail. She would make coffee, drink it while reviewing notes for whatever exam loomed on her calendar, then drive the 8 minutes to the diner in her 2003 Honda Civic, a vehicle her father had helped her buy for $1,500 the previous year. But on this particular morning, Jennifer Hayes never arrived at Maggie's kitchen. At 5:40, the manager, a woman named Carol Winters who had worked at the diner for 32 years, noticed Jennifer's absence. Carol stood at the grill, bacon sizzling, eggs waiting to be cracked. She glanced at the clock above the pie case. 5:45, 6 o'clock. Carol called Jennifer's cell phone. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She called again at 6:15. Same result. This was unlike Jennifer, who in 18 months of employment had never missed a shift without calling, had never been more than 5 minutes late. Carol felt the first small flutter of concern. Nothing urgent yet, just a mental note that something was off. By 7 o'clock, when the breakfast rush began and Carol was struggling alone, she called Jennifer's emergency contact, her mother Susan. Susan Hayes answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. No, she had not heard from Jennifer since Sunday evening when they spoke briefly by phone. Yes, she would drive to Sheboygan Falls immediately to check on her daughter. Susan arrived at the apartment building at 7:45. She had a spare key that Jennifer had given her months earlier for emergencies. She climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor, knocked 3 times, called her daughter's name. Silence answered. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. The scene inside appeared both ordinary and wrong in ways that would be discussed and analyzed for years afterward. The coffee mug sat on the counter, brown residue dried in the bottom. The coffee maker was turned off but still warm enough to suggest it had been used within the past few hours. Jennifer's textbooks lay open on the card table, highlighter beside them, the cap off. Her work uniform hung on a hook near the bathroom, still in its dry cleaning plastic. Her keys were not in their usual spot on the small table by the door. Her purse was gone. Her cell phone was gone. Her winter coat, a navy blue parka from Target, was gone. But her car sat in the parking lot below, unlocked, keys dangling from the ignition. Susan Hayes stood in the small apartment, her breath visible in the cold air, seeping through walls with poor insulation, and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. She called the Sheboygan Falls Police Department at 7:51. The dispatcher told her an officer would be there within 10 minutes. Susan went back downstairs to wait, standing beside her daughter's car, staring at those keys in the ignition, trying to construct a scenario that made sense. Jennifer had walked away from her car with keys still in it. Jennifer had left her apartment door unlocked. Jennifer had abandoned her textbooks mid-study session. None of these actions aligned with the careful, conscientious young woman Susan had raised. Officer Mark Kowalski arrived at 8:03, a 10-year veteran of the small police force, a man who had handled noise complaints and domestic disputes and theft reports, but never a disappearance. He took notes as Susan explained. He examined the apartment, touching nothing. He radioed for backup. By 9 o'clock, Detective Sarah Chen from the Sheboygan County Sheriff's Department had been called in. By 10 o'clock, Jennifer Hayes had officially been reported missing. Detective Chen was 38 years old, originally from Milwaukee. Someone who had worked her way up through the ranks with careful attention to detail and an ability to read people that colleagues found unsettling in its accuracy. She stood in Jennifer's apartment, gloved hands careful not to disturb potential evidence, and studied the scene. The open textbooks, the uncapped highlighter, the coffee mug. She noted the temperature in the apartment, cold enough to see her breath. She noted the silence, how sound carried in the old building, how thin the walls seemed. She interviewed neighbors. The woman in the apartment below had heard footsteps around 4:30 in the morning. Nothing unusual, the normal sounds of someone moving around in early morning routine. The couple across the hall had heard nothing, had slept through until 6:30. By noon, search teams had assembled. Volunteers from the community, firefighters, police officers from neighboring jurisdictions, bloodhounds brought in from a K-9 unit in Green Bay. They spread out in expanding circles from the apartment building. They walked through the small downtown, checking alleys and dumpsters. They searched the riverbank, where ice was beginning to form along the edges. They walked through the industrial area on the east side of town, where old factory buildings stood empty, windows broken, graffiti marking brick walls. They found nothing. No trace of Jennifer Hayes, no sign of struggle, no discarded belongings. The Civic yielded little. Fingerprints on the steering wheel and door handles matched Jennifer's, as expected. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no foreign hairs or fibers that seemed significant. The keys in the ignition troubled everyone. Why would someone leave keys in an unlocked car in a parking lot? Detective Chen stood beside the vehicle, studying it from different angles, trying to read meaning into the placement of those keys. The search continued through the afternoon, as temperature dropped and gray sky darkened toward evening. News crews arrived from Milwaukee, cameras filming volunteers walking in lines through empty fields, filming Jennifer's mother being interviewed, her face pale and tight with controlled panic. The story appeared on evening broadcasts across Wisconsin. Missing nursing student, last seen Wednesday evening. Anyone with information, please contact Sheboygan County Sheriff's Department. As darkness fell on November 17th, Jennifer Hayes had been missing for approximately 15 hours. Detective Chen sat in her office reviewing notes, studying the timeline, feeling the weight of those first crucial hours slipping away. She had learned early in her career that the first 24 hours determined everything. After that, cases grew cold, trails went dead, chances of finding someone alive diminished with each passing day. She reviewed what they knew. Jennifer had been in her apartment at some point in the early morning hours. She had made coffee. She had been studying. Then something had happened that caused her to leave quickly, taking her purse and phone and coat, but leaving behind the car she would have needed to drive to work. Had someone come to her door? Had she received a call or text that prompted her to leave? Chen had already requested Jennifer's phone records, but those would take time to obtain. Those who knew Jennifer said she was not the type to leave spontaneously. She was cautious, methodical, someone who planned and worried and double-checked locks. Her sisters described her as anxious about safety, about walking alone after dark, about trusting strangers. She had pepper spray in her purse that her father had given her. She had taken a self-defense class at the college. These were not the habits of someone who would walk away willingly with a person she did not know. Deputies whispered quietly about possibilities. Abduction, accident, voluntary disappearance, though none believed this last option. They discussed statistics about missing persons, about the reality that most cases involved someone known to the victim, someone trusted enough to get close. Detective Chen made a list of everyone in Jennifer's life: family members, co-workers, fellow students, professors. She began the methodical work of interviewing each one, building a picture of Jennifer's daily existence, looking for gaps or inconsistencies or secrets that might explain an impossible disappearance. By the end of the first week, the investigation had generated hundreds of pages of reports but no solid leads. The community remained mobilized. Flyers with Jennifer's photograph appeared in every storefront window. Her image looked out from utility poles and bulletin boards. Candlelight vigils drew crowds to the town square. But as November gave way to December, as snow began to fall and cover the ground in white that made searching nearly impossible, the case began to cool. The news crews departed. The volunteers returned to their regular lives. The bloodhounds were sent home. Detective Chen continued working, but she felt the case slipping into that category investigators dreaded: unsolved, inactive, cold. Part 2. The investigation, the search operation in those first weeks had been extensive, coordinated through multiple agencies, with a precision that spoke to how seriously authorities took Jennifer's disappearance. The Sheboygan County Sheriff's Department led the effort, but they had assistance from the FBI's Milwaukee Field Office, the Wisconsin Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation, and local police departments from surrounding communities. Over 300 volunteers participated in ground searches during the first 10 days. They used topographical maps to divide the county into grid sections. Teams of 5 or 6 moved through each section methodically, looking for any sign: disturbed earth, torn fabric, personal belongings. Anything that might indicate Jennifer had passed through or been brought there. The searches focused on several key areas. The industrial zone east of downtown received particular attention because of its isolation and numerous hiding places. Abandoned buildings were checked room by room, basements searched, crawl spaces examined. The riverfront was walked repeatedly, both banks, looking for signs someone might have entered the water. Rural areas within a 10-mile radius were combed through, focusing on wooded areas, ravines, old wells, places where someone might dispose of evidence or hide a body. Though no one wanted to say those words aloud yet. The community response was overwhelming in its intensity. Sheboygan Falls was the sort of place where people still left doors unlocked, where children rode bicycles without supervision, where the most serious crimes typically involved underage drinking or domestic arguments that police broke up without arrests. A young woman vanishing from her apartment struck at something fundamental in the collective sense of safety. If this could happen to Jennifer Hayes, careful and cautious Jennifer who worked 2 jobs and studied late into the night, it could happen to anyone. Maggie's Kitchen became an unofficial headquarters for volunteer coordinators. Carol Winters organized shifts, kept coffee brewing around the clock, made sandwiches for searchers. The high school principal canceled classes one Friday so students could join search efforts. Local businesses donated supplies: flashlights, batteries, warm clothing, food for volunteers. The VFW Hall opened its doors as a gathering place where people could warm up between search shifts and share information. But beneath the organized chaos, Detective Chen noticed things that troubled her. Small inconsistencies that accumulated like water drops, eventually forming a stream. Jennifer's phone records arrived 4 days after she disappeared. They showed normal patterns of communication: calls to her mother, texts to classmates about study groups, messages to her manager about shift schedules. But there was one number that appeared frequently, especially in the evenings over the past 2 months. Calls lasting 20, 30, sometimes 40 minutes. Texts exchanged multiple times per day. When Chen traced the number, she discovered it belonged to Derek Morrison, a 26-year-old who worked as a mechanic at a garage on Highway 28, just outside town limits. Derek Morrison had not come forward during the initial investigation. He had not been among the volunteers searching. His name had not appeared on Jennifer's emergency contact list or in any of the initial interviews with family and friends. This omission struck Detective Chen as significant. She drove to the garage on November 23rd, 6 days after Jennifer's disappearance. The building was a prefabricated metal structure with 2 garage bays and a small office. Oil stains darkened the concrete floor. The smell of gasoline and rubber hung thick in the air. Derek Morrison stood beside a lifted truck, ratchet in hand, wearing coveralls stained with grease. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair cut short, and a lean build that suggested someone who worked physically. When Chen showed her badge and asked to speak with him, his expression remained neutral in a way she found interesting. No surprise, no concern, just a flat acknowledgement. They spoke in the small office, cluttered with parts catalogs and coffee cups, and a calendar featuring classic cars. Chen asked directly about his relationship with Jennifer Hayes. Morrison leaned back in a chair that squeaked under his weight and said they had been dating for about 3 months. Not seriously, he added quickly, just casual. They met at Walgreens, where he sometimes bought supplies for the garage. They started talking. He asked for her number. They went out a few times, grabbed food, watched movies at his apartment. Chen asked why he had not contacted police when Jennifer disappeared. Morrison shrugged, a gesture that seemed practiced in its casualness. He said he figured family and close friends were handling it. He did not want to intrude. He did not think he knew anything useful. Chen noted his word choices, the way he spoke about Jennifer in past tense even then, 6 days into her disappearance, when most people still clung to hope of finding her alive. She asked about the last time he saw Jennifer. Morrison said it was Sunday evening, November 13th, 4 days before she vanished. They had met at his apartment, watched television, ordered pizza. Jennifer left around 9 o'clock because she had an early shift the next morning. He had not spoken to her since, though he admitted they had texted Monday and Tuesday. Just casual stuff, he said. Nothing important. Chen asked if she could see his phone. Morrison hesitated, then agreed. The text exchange with Jennifer ended Tuesday evening at 10:47, with Jennifer saying she needed to study and Morrison responding with a single word, "Okay." There was nothing Wednesday morning, nothing to suggest plans to meet or any reason Jennifer would have left her apartment before dawn. Chen asked where Morrison had been Wednesday morning. He said home, asleep. He lived alone in a duplex on the south side of town. No one could verify his whereabouts between midnight and 7 in the morning when he arrived at the garage. His boss confirmed he had been on time for his shift that day, had worked normally, had not seemed upset or distracted. Detective Chen left the garage with more questions than answers. Something about Morrison bothered her, though she could not immediately articulate what. Perhaps it was his calmness, the way he seemed almost bored by the questioning. Perhaps it was the disconnect between the frequency of contact shown in phone records and his characterization of their relationship as casual. Perhaps it was simply instinct honed by years of interviewing people who lied about things large and small. She pulled Jennifer's phone records again and studied the pattern more carefully. The calls and texts with Morrison had been frequent and lengthy until Tuesday evening. Then nothing. Morrison claimed this was normal, that sometimes they went days without contact. But when Chen looked at the overall pattern, she saw they had not gone more than 24 hours without at least a text message in the previous 8 weeks. The sudden silence seemed significant. Over the following days, Chen dug deeper into Derek Morrison's background. He had grown up in Sheboygan Falls, graduated from high school with mediocre grades, drifted through a series of jobs before settling at the garage 3 years earlier. He had one arrest on his record, a bar fight at age 21 that resulted in disorderly conduct charges. He lived within his means, paid rent on time, had no significant debts. His social media presence was minimal, a few photos of cars he had worked on. No photos of Jennifer, which struck Chen as notable given that people in new relationships typically posted about them online. She interviewed Morrison's co-workers at the garage. They described him as competent but distant, someone who did his job efficiently but did not socialize much, who ate lunch alone, who left immediately when his shift ended. When asked if Morrison had mentioned Jennifer Hayes, they said no, not until after she disappeared and her photo started appearing on the news. Even then, Morrison had only commented once that it was sad, that you never knew what could happen. The physical evidence remained frustratingly sparse. Jennifer's apartment yielded nothing useful. No signs of struggle, no fingerprints that did not belong. Her car had been processed thoroughly with the same result. The bloodhounds had tracked her scent from the apartment building to the parking lot and then lost it, suggesting she had gotten into a vehicle there. But whose vehicle, and why? Those who knew Morrison said he drove a 1998 Ford F-150, dark blue, somewhat rusted around the wheel wells. Detective Chen obtained a warrant to search it. Morrison handed over the keys without protest. That same flat affect, that same unsettling calmness. The truck was examined in a garage bay under bright lights by technicians who knew what to look for. They found exactly what you would expect in a mechanic's work truck: tools, fast food wrappers, old receipts, floor mats caked with mud and road salt. They found 3 blonde hairs on the passenger seat that were sent for analysis. They found a small blood stain on the floor mat, also sent for testing. Morrison explained the hairs by saying Jennifer had ridden in his truck several times. He explained the blood by saying he had cut his hand on a sharp piece of metal 2 weeks earlier. The lab results took time. This was a small county with limited resources. Samples were sent to the state crime lab in Madison, where they joined a backlog of cases from across Wisconsin. Weeks passed. December arrived with heavy snowfall that buried the landscape and made further outdoor searching impossible. Chen continued interviewing people, building timelines, looking for gaps. She spoke with Jennifer's classmates who described her as studious and serious, someone who participated in group projects, but did not socialize much outside of class. She spoke with Jennifer's family again and again, asking about Jennifer's state of mind, whether she seemed worried or frightened, whether she had mentioned any problems. Susan Hayes maintained her daughter had seemed normal, perhaps a bit tired from working and studying, but not upset or scared. She mentioned that Jennifer had seemed happier lately, more animated when they spoke by phone, and Susan had assumed this meant school was going well. Chen asked about Derek Morrison. Had Jennifer mentioned him? Susan frowned, thinking. Jennifer had mentioned seeing someone casually, someone she had met through work, but she had not provided details or a name. This was typical of Jennifer, who kept her private life private, who did not share much about relationships or feelings. Susan wished now she had asked more questions, pushed harder for information, though of course hindsight always revealed what should have been done differently. Deputies whispered quietly about their own suspicions. Most believed Morrison knew more than he was saying. His story was too clean, too simple. His demeanor was wrong for someone whose girlfriend had vanished, but suspicion was not evidence. Chen needed something concrete, something that would justify bringing Morrison in for more aggressive questioning or arresting him. The lab results came back in mid-December. The blonde hairs from Morrison's truck matched Jennifer's DNA. This was expected and proved nothing since Morrison had acknowledged Jennifer rode in his truck. The blood on the floor mat matched Morrison's DNA. Again, this aligned with his explanation. Chen had been hoping for something more, some piece of physical evidence that would crack the case open. Instead, she had confirmation of what both parties had already stated. She brought Morrison in for another interview on December 20th. This time she took a different approach, pressing harder, challenging inconsistencies. She pointed out that his phone records showed he had tried calling Jennifer 6 times Wednesday morning between 7 and 9 o'clock, calls he had not mentioned in his first interview. Morrison shifted in his seat, the first sign of discomfort Chen had seen from him. He said he tried calling because he was worried when he heard at work that she had not shown up at the diner. Chen asked why he would be worried about someone he described as a casual acquaintance. Morrison's jaw tightened. He said he cared about her, that casual did not mean he did not worry. Chen asked again about Tuesday evening, the last time Morrison admitted contact with Jennifer. She asked him to walk through the entire evening in detail. Morrison said they had texted back and forth about meeting up Wednesday morning before Jennifer's shift. He said Jennifer suggested he pick her up around 4:30 so they could get breakfast together before she needed to be at work. Chen asked why this was not mentioned in his first interview. Morrison said he forgot, that he was nervous being questioned by police, that it did not seem important because they never actually met up. This new information shifted everything. If Morrison was telling the truth, he had plans to pick Jennifer up Wednesday morning at 4:30. This explained why Jennifer might have left her apartment and gotten into his truck, leaving her car behind. Chen asked Morrison what happened when he arrived to pick her up. Morrison said he never went. He said he changed his mind, that he was tired, that he texted Jennifer around 4 o'clock to cancel. Chen asked to see his phone again. Morrison said he had deleted the texts because he regularly cleared old messages to free up storage space. Chen did not believe him. Every instinct told her Morrison was lying, that he had picked Jennifer up Wednesday morning, that something had happened in his truck or wherever he took her. But she could not prove it. Without Jennifer's phone, she could not verify whether Morrison had texted to cancel. Without witnesses, she could not place Morrison's truck at Jennifer's apartment building Wednesday morning. Without a body, she could not prove Jennifer was even dead, though everyone involved had stopped hoping otherwise weeks ago. The interview ended inconclusively. Morrison left the sheriff's department, drove back to his duplex, went to work the next morning as usual. Chen sat at her desk surrounded by case files and felt the frustration of knowing something, but being unable to prove it. She continued working the case through the holidays, through the new year, through the long Wisconsin winter. She re-interviewed witnesses. She requested additional searches when snow melted in early spring. She waited for someone to make a mistake or find Jennifer's body or come forward with new information. But none of those things happened. The case grew cold in the way cases do when leads dry up and time passes and public attention moves elsewhere. By summer 2012, Jennifer Hayes had been missing for 8 months. The case remained open but inactive. Detective Chen moved on to new investigations, though Jennifer's file stayed on her desk. A reminder of unfinished business, of questions left unanswered, of a young woman who had vanished as completely as smoke dissolving into air. Part 3. The silence 18 months after Jennifer disappeared. Her family made decisions that spoke to their quiet surrender of hope. In June 2013, Susan and Robert Hayes sold their house in West Bend and moved north to Rhinelander, a small city near the Northwoods, where Robert had been offered a supervisor position at a paper mill. They told neighbors and friends they needed a fresh start, needed to escape the constant reminders, needed to exist somewhere that did not contain Jennifer's ghost on every corner. But those who knew them understood the deeper truth. They were fleeing the not knowing, the terrible suspension between life and death where their youngest daughter remained frozen. The 2 older daughters stayed in southern Wisconsin. Sarah, the eldest at 29, worked as an accountant in Appleton and had 2 children of her own, boys aged 4 and 2. Michelle, the middle sister at 27, taught elementary school in Fond du Lac. Both women struggled with their sister's disappearance in ways that manifested differently, but with equal pain. Sarah threw herself into work and parenting with an intensity that bordered on manic, filling every moment so there was no space left for grief or speculation. Michelle developed insomnia, spending hours late at night reading online forums about missing persons cases. Convinced that pattern recognition or sheer determination could somehow solve what professional investigators could not. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the sick weight of suspicion battling against loyalty, the Hayes family understood this particular torture. They never spoke Derek Morrison's name aloud in family gatherings, but his presence haunted conversations anyway. Susan had nightmares where she saw her daughter in Morrison's truck, saw Jennifer's face pressed against glass, saw her reaching out as the vehicle drove away into darkness. She would wake gasping, heart hammering, to find herself in an unfamiliar bedroom in a house she still did not quite recognize as home. Robert dealt with loss through silence. He worked long shifts at the mill, came home exhausted, ate dinner, watched television without seeming to see what played across the screen. He had always been a man of few words, but after Jennifer disappeared, he became almost wordless, communicating in grunts and nods. Susan sometimes wondered if they were still married in any meaningful sense, or if they were simply two people occupying the same space, both crushed under the weight of the same unbearable knowledge. Detective Chen visited the family once after they moved to Rhinelander, driving 3 hours north to update them on the status of the investigation. She sat in their small living room, coffee cooling in a mug she held but did not drink from, and explained that the case remained open but that there were no new leads. She said Morrison was still the primary person of interest, but that without evidence, they could not charge him with anything. She said she believed Jennifer was deceased, though she did not use that word, choosing instead the softer phrase "no longer with us," as if Jennifer had simply wandered off to another town and forgotten to call home. Susan asked the question she always asked: did Chen think Jennifer suffered? Did it happen quickly? Chen had no answers that provided comfort. She said only that she hoped for the best-case scenario, whatever that might mean in a situation where all scenarios were terrible. She left the Hayes family with business cards that already had worn edges from being carried in purses and wallets, phone numbers memorized, but called less frequently as months became years. In Sheboygan Falls, life continued in the way life does. The missing persons flyers eventually came down from storefront windows, replaced by advertisements for summer festivals and back-to-school sales. New families moved into the apartment building where Jennifer had lived. New students filled the seats she had occupied in nursing classes. Maggie's Kitchen hired new servers to work the breakfast shift. The collective memory of Jennifer Hayes began to fade, as all memories eventually do. Preserved mainly in the minds of those who loved her, and in the dusty case files that filled a cardboard box on Detective Chen's shelf. Derek Morrison continued working at the garage. He had moved from the duplex to a small house on the edge of town, a ranch-style place with vinyl siding and a detached garage where he spent weekends working on a classic Camaro he was restoring. Neighbors described him as quiet and polite, someone who kept to himself, who maintained his property, who did not cause trouble. He dated occasionally, nothing serious, women he met at the bar on Highway 23 where he sometimes stopped for a beer after work. Those relationships never lasted long, usually ending after a few weeks when the women seemed to drift away without drama or explanation. If Morrison felt guilt or remorse about Jennifer Hayes, he never showed it to anyone. He went to work, came home, worked on his car, lived his life as if nothing had happened, as if a young woman had not vanished from the earth. Those who suspected him, and there were many, found this absence of visible conscience more damning than any evidence. But as Chen had learned and relearned throughout her career, seeming guilty and being guilty were different things in the eyes of the law. The case might have stayed cold forever, might have joined the ranks of Wisconsin's unsolved disappearances, might have become nothing more than a cautionary tale parents told daughters about being careful and paying attention and trusting instincts. But in October 2016, nearly 5 years after Jennifer vanished, something shifted. A woman named Rachel Turner walked into the Sheboygan Falls Police Department and asked to speak with someone about Derek Morrison. She was 24, worked as a receptionist at a dentist's office in town, had been dating Morrison for 2 months. Officer Kowalski, the same officer who had responded to Susan Hayes' initial call in 2011, sat with Rachel in an interview room and listened to what she had to say. Rachel explained that she and Morrison had started seeing each other casually in August. Things had gone well at first. He was charming in a quiet way, attentive, good with his hands, skilled at fixing things around her apartment that her landlord ignored. But over the past few weeks, his behavior had become strange. He talked in his sleep, fragmentary sentences that did not quite make sense, but carried a tone of distress. He had nightmares that woke him gasping. He drank more, beer after work turning into whiskey at home, bottles accumulating and recycling faster than seemed normal for one person. The previous weekend, Rachel said, they had been at his house watching a movie when Jennifer Hayes' case came up on a true crime show. The program detailed her disappearance, showed photos of her apartment and her car, interviewed her mother who pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. Morrison had gone rigid beside Rachel on the couch. His jaw clenched, his hands formed fists. Then he stood abruptly and turned off the television. Rachel asked what was wrong. Morrison said only that he did not like those kinds of shows, that they were exploitative, that people's pain should not be entertainment. Rachel said she had known Morrison was questioned about Jennifer's disappearance, but he had always maintained he had nothing to do with it. That police had focused on him only because he knew Jennifer. She had believed him because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. But after watching his reaction to the show, seeing the physical manifestation of something that looked like guilt or fear or both, she started paying closer attention. Morrison talked in his sleep again that night. Rachel pretended to be asleep herself and listened. The words came in fragments, disconnected phrases that she tried to remember and repeat for Officer Kowalski. She said Morrison had said something about the river, about being cold, about nobody finding her. He said sorry repeatedly. He said other things Rachel could not understand or recall clearly. In the morning, Morrison seemed normal, made coffee, kissed her goodbye when she left for work. But Rachel could not shake the feeling that she had glimpsed something dark. Officer Kowalski thanked Rachel for coming forward and immediately contacted Detective Chen, who by 2016 had been promoted to sergeant, but still carried Jennifer's case with her like a stone in her pocket. Chen interviewed Rachel Turner herself the next day, taking detailed notes, recording the conversation, asking Rachel to remember every word Morrison had said in his sleep, every detail about his behavior. This was not enough for an arrest. Sleep talk was not a confession. But it was enough to renew Chen's focus, to justify bringing Morrison in for another interview, to revisit evidence with fresh perspective. She obtained a new warrant to search Morrison's current residence. She assembled a team of investigators and forensic technicians. On October 26, 2016, they descended on the small ranch house where Derek Morrison lived alone. The search lasted 12 hours. They examined every room, every closet, every drawer. They pulled up carpet in the garage looking for bloodstains. They photographed the Camaro Morrison was restoring and searched its interior thoroughly. They found nothing directly incriminating, no bloody clothes or hidden trophies or written confessions. But in a storage bin in the basement, wrapped carefully in a plastic grocery bag, they found a cell phone. The phone was several years old, a model that had been common in 2011. The battery was dead. When technicians powered it up in the lab, they discovered it was Jennifer Hayes' phone, her contacts, her photos, her text messages, including the exchange with Morrison that had ended Tuesday evening, November 15th, with her saying she needed to study. There were no messages from Morrison Wednesday morning saying he was canceling their plans, nothing to support his story. The phone had been turned off at 4:47 Wednesday morning and never turned back on. Detective Chen sat in the lab watching technicians extract data from the phone and felt something like vindication mixed with sorrow. She had been right about Morrison. 5 years of being right without being able to prove it. 5 years of knowing what happened without witnesses or body or confession. But now she had Jennifer's phone found in Morrison's possession, physical evidence he could not explain away. They brought Derek Morrison in for questioning on October 28th. This time, Chen did not ask about his relationship with Jennifer or his whereabouts the morning she disappeared. This time, she placed Jennifer's phone on the table between them and asked him a single question. "How did this end up in your basement?" Morrison stared at the phone. For the first time in 5 years of interactions with law enforcement, his composure cracked. His face went pale. His hands trembled. He asked for a lawyer. The interview ended.